It is day 59. I'm in my bedroom because I have to be quiet. Well, I'm quieter in here than I am in the main room, and Mark is right here hanging out next to me. So we're on a new chapter, chapter 22, on page 426. Yay! Wait, I kind of like it when Pearl's in the shot. So let me just refigure a little bit. Sorry, pardon my lack of decor in here. I haven't put anything on the walls, even though it's been like 2 months. And I also have clutter on my desk, but you'll just have to forgive me. Okay. To the extent that Robert Moses had lost his popularity, however, it was to be restored to him almost immediately by his most powerful enemy. The president's move against Moses had actually begun in February 1934, months before Moses' gubernatorial race. Also, it's a grout fit day for me. I'm not leaving the house. Same thing with Pearl. It's always a grout fit day. The president's move against Moses had actually begun in February 1934, months before Moses' gubernatorial race. But it had been kept completely secret from the public for that entire year. Corporation Counsel Paul Windells, one of the handful of men aware of it during 1934, recalls vividly how he first heard about it. On February 22, I'll never forget it, I was sitting home reading the Sunday papers in my home on Pineapple Street. Gasp, that's not that far from where I live now. Okay, that's exciting. I was reading the Sunday papers in my home on Pineapple Street when LaGuardia called. He said, "What are you doing?" I told him. He said, "Well, I'm down in Bay Ridge making a talk, and I'll be by in about 20 minutes to pick you up." I got in the car, and no sooner did I sit down than he cut loose. Jesus Christ, of all the people in the city of New York, I had to pick the one man who Roosevelt won't stand for, and he won't give me any more money unless I get rid of him. Jesus Christ, I had to pick the one he hated. Jesus Christ. He was shaking his fists in the air and shouting, Jesus Christ, 7 million people in the city, and I had to pick the one Roosevelt can't stand. LaGuardia, unfamiliar with state politics, had been unaware when he brought Moses into his administration, at least partly because he thought Moses could help him obtain New Deal public works funds, of the hatred between Moses and the man who was the New Deal. And Moses hadn't bothered to tell him. Wow, and LaGuardia gave Moses so many positions. But LaGuardia hadn't been allowed to remain in ignorance for long. On February 21st, Harold Ickes, Secretary of the Interior and Administrator of the Public Works Administration, having summoned the mayor to Washington on direct orders from the president, informed the mayor, on direct orders from the president, of the president's feelings, and demanded that LaGuardia dismiss Moses from the board of the PWA Finance Triborough Bridge Authority. In Ickes' secret diary, what a great name for a book, he wrote that LaGuardia regretted the situation and said that if he had known it existed, he wouldn't have thought for a minute of putting Moses on the board. He expressed the highest regard for the president and asked me to give him a few days to see what he might work out. But in the next few days, LaGuardia was able to work out nothing, for Moses did not prove at all cooperative. The mayor may have appointed Moses to quietly resign. After all, Moses was his appointee, and it is traditional in American politics for an appointee to resign when the appointer wishes him to. Moreover, there was so much at stake here. A vital project for the city, which could be built only if the federal government was willing to pay for it. One man surely could not think of standing in the way just so he could be in charge of it. And while Moses could not be forced to resign from the Triborough post, he had drawn the Triborough law so that the authority commissioners could be removed only on stated charges after a formal hearing. He held his park commissionership, a post both men then considered much more important, only at the pleasure of the mayor, and the mayor, therefore, possessed a powerful weapon. He could threaten to remove Moses from the more important post unless he resigned from the less important. But Moses had learned from his dealings with Roosevelt when FDR was governor that he could force a governor to back down by threatening to publicize certain matters, such as requests for patronage. He had learned that he could force a governor to back down on more complex issues by simplifying them through a threat to resign over them, a threat which reduced the issue to the question of whether or not the public wanted him to continue in office. And now Moses employed the same technique on a mayor. He told LaGuardia that if the mayor insisted on his resignation, he would resign, all right? But he would resign not just from Triborough post, but from the park commissionership as well. And he would issue a public statement disclosing why he was resigning, a statement making clear that the mayor had bowed to outside pressure to remove a city official who had done nothing to justify such treatment. LaGuardia had picked up Windels on the day after his conference with Ickes to ask the sage of Pineapple Street for advice. Okay, I have to confess that this whole time we talk about Paul Windels all the time, and now he's called the sage of Pineapple Street, but I feel like I don't quite know what he even is. Okay, so he has a Wikipedia. He lived 1885 to 1967. He was an American lawyer and government official. He was Corporation Counsel of New York City under Fiorello LaGuardia from 34 to 37. And yeah, he just feels like one of those guys who is a lawyer and works in government. Nothing crazy on this page. This, unlike, Mayor Mitchell, kind of another minor character, this guy did not fall out of an airplane or anything. Okay, anyway, so he's the sage of Pineapple Street. Recalls Windels. I say, now look, you've been elected mayor on the theory that you are going to run an absolutely independent administration. You can't start off by knuckling under to outside dictation. If you do, your name is going to be mud. I told him that if he ousted Moses, the public would believe that he could be pressured in a situation like this and throw out a man who the public thinks is wonderful. And I told him, if you do that, you'll never be able to erase that from the public's mind. From others, including City Chamberlain and New Deal brain truster Adolph A. Burl Jr., the link between the city and federal government administrations, LaGuardia received the same advice. Okay, so Burl is the New Deal brain truster. He telegraphed, the president, personal. Moses matter probably will become a national incident within a few days. I think this is one of the things you cannot do unless there are reasons other than personal giving ground for public defense. Moses will certainly resign not merely from Triborough but from city administration, stating his position of which our opposition friends are prepared to make the most. I hardly know Moses, but suggest there might be more real devils to fight. Remember the execution of the Duke Denegan broke Napoleon. That's another European metaphor. Where's Jake? He'll be happy about that. LaGuardia stalled. Repeatedly, he promised Ickes that Moses' resignation was imminent. And repeatedly, he came up with excuses for new delays. But Roosevelt was, Ickes wrote in his diary, implacable. The president was determined to have his revenge, and in case that determination flagged, and there is no reason to believe it ever did, little Lewis Howe and big Jim Farley were there to keep it fresh, both of them urging him on. He instructed Ickes to take a more forceful tone. The PWA chief, who hardly knew Moses, was to confess later that from the beginning, I had had no stomach for this whole affair. I was in the unhappy position of having to admit to myself that Moses was an inefficient administrator and a public-spirited citizen. But, he said, my loyalty ran to the president, and I was determined to work it out to his satisfaction if I could. There's so many characters being mentioned here, but the gist, I think, is that LaGuardia gave Moses a ton of power, and now he's realizing, like, oh, wait, the president isn't going to give federal funds to Moses because the president hates Moses, so I need to make Moses step down. That's what's happening. He told LaGuardia, the PWA chief told LaGuardia that he would not approve new Triborough requisitions until the mayor had obtained Moses's resignation from the Triborough board. LaGuardia stalled. Then Ickes said he would not approve a single new PWA project of any type in New York City, not hospital, school, or subway, until Moses resigned. Still, LaGuardia stalled. He would make promises, and then he would break his promises, Ickes wrote. It was, give me this payment and I'll get rid of him next week. That type of thing, Windels recalled. And the stalling succeeded in keeping payments coming for Triborough and the other projects. Then came the gubernatorial campaign, with Moses running as a Republican. Naturally, I had to declare a truce during that period in order to avoid a charge that I was playing politics, Ickes said. More requisitions were approved. But as soon as the votes were counted, the truce was off. On November 7th, the day after the election, Moses sent to Washington new Triborough requisitions totaling $8,100,000. The requisitions reached Ickes' desk on November 8th, and on that day, the PWA administrator telephoned LaGuardia and told the mayor that they would stay on his desk unsigned until Moses's resignation lay there beside them. But also, okay, we keep talking about Windels and Ickes and like Adolph Burns or whatever, Adolph Burl. But I think what it is that Adolph Burl and Ickes, they're New Deal people. They're Roosevelt ally people. Whereas Adolph Burl, Adolph Burl is a New Deal brain truster. But then the guy we just talked about, Paul Windels, he's just a random New York City Republican guy. He's a city person, not a federal person. Furthermore, Ickes said no new PWA projects would be approved for New York City. The administrator apparently made a further threat. In his secret diary, he wrote, and it's secret diary in italics, so it's a formal title. I am considering refusing to honor requisitions for funds for projects already underway in the city, an action that would throw out of work the tens of thousands of men now employed on them. All through November and December, the drama of revenge and power played on. Its cast included some of the most colorful characters in American politics. On one side, a jaw-jaunty, cigarette holder cocked, face open and friendly, was the master politician in the White House, FDR. Beside him, the old curmudgeon of interior, the scarred, doty reformer from Chicago, almost the incarnation of lonely, righteous, and inexhaustible pugnacity, one reviewer was to call him, who in less than 2 years on the national stage had proven himself a character actor of the first magnitude, winning the public's heart with the dour, skeptical, but kindly glare that he flashed at it over the top of rimless spectacles that were forever slipping down along his nose. And with his flawless performance as the tart-tongued, terrible-tempered, but invincibly honest defender of the public interest. On the other side, quote, modern Horatius on another unfinished bridge, one reviewer was to call him, Robert Moses, seriously ill and confined for most of the drama to his home with an influenza which had deepened into an illness variously described as pneumonia or nervous exhaustion. In the middle, glowering out from under his big black Stetson, the prickly little flower of City Hall. Circling around these stars, spear carriers perfectly typecast, the burly, bald, gregarious postmaster general, the lean, sharp-eyed, sardonic city chamberlain, and the wizened little gnome whose proposed appointment to minor state park post a decade before had been the drama's prologue. Any audience would have been delighted at the show, but no audience got to see it. It played day after day, week after week, behind closed curtains. Not a word of the dispute, not a hint that there was one, was uttered over the airwaves or printed in the newspaper. Moses' grim fight went on in absolute secrecy. One second. I'm having another sip. Here, you can look at Pearl. Okay, back to business. On November 21, I like it when Robert Caro gets all like, when he uses a lot of adjectives. He's because he's a fun writer. And in that last paragraph, it was just so colorful, kind of fun. On November 21, the PWA board was scheduled to meet at 2 o'clock to approve a long list of projects. Shortly before the meeting began, Ix slashed off the list everyone located in New York City. Then he telephoned LaGuardia to tell him what he had done. There are indications. This is so Real Housewives. Like, they're all doing this. It took me so long to really, with all the characters and stuff, it took me a long time to kind of realize, like, wait, this is just, they're all being either loyal to Roosevelt, who doesn't like Moses, or loyal to Moses, who doesn't like Roosevelt. Then Ix telephoned LaGuardia to tell him what he had done. There are indications that Moses' loss of popularity in the gubernatorial campaign was weighing heavily in the scales on which the mayor was weighing the alternatives. Windels had told him he couldn't oust a man who the public thinks is wonderful. But apparently much of the public no longer thought Moses was wonderful. In conversations with him, the mayor, if he did not ask Moses to resign in so many words, apparently pressed more forcefully the suggestion that the whole city should not be made to pay for his seat on the Triborough board. In reply, Moses apparently pointed out that there was no way he could be removed from Triborough except on charges. Telephoning Ix, LaGuardia pointed this out. As Ix recalled in his secret diary, I told him that was his funeral and not mine. LaGuardia huddled daily with Windels now, and with C.C. Burlingham, the grand old man of the reform movement, whose opinion the mayor valued so highly that, quote, from him and from no one else would he take a scolding. Both men argued, Windels on political grounds, Burlingham on grounds of principle, that he should not knuckle under to Roosevelt. The mayor was torn. On one hand, Windels believes, he realized that it would have painted an indelible picture of him in an unfavorable light. On the other hand, there were his dreams for remaking New York, dreams which would be impossible of realization without the federal funds which Roosevelt alone could provide. Shrewdly calculating politician that he was, Fiorello LaGuardia was weighing the alternatives, always weighing. Then, on December 26, 1934, Roosevelt and Ix threw on those delicate scales something that weighed them to the president's side. It was an official general PWA order. Administrative Order Number 129 was its title, and it stated flatly, "Hereafter, no funds shall be advanced to any authority, board, or commission constituting an independent corporation or entity created for a specific project wholly within the confines of a municipality. Any of the members of the governing body of which authority, board, or commission holds any public office under said municipality." Hold on, I need to translate. I need to think about that in my head more. I didn't pay enough attention. Okay, so no funds going to projects that are happening in a city. No projects are allowed to go, or no funds are allowed to go to projects that are happening entirely in one city. Is kind of it. The order obviously applied to Triborough and to Moses. By coincidence, it also applied to another New York City official, Tenement House Commissioner Langdon W. Post, who was a member of the Municipal Housing Authority, which was also receiving federal funds. But Ix privately assured LaGuardia that the order would not be enforced in Post's case. Post stayed out of the controversy because he was away on an ocean cruise. Wow, the tenement house administrator is on an ocean cruise. That doesn't feel like it should happen. It had almost the full force of law. It had the full force of an official regulation of the agency financing Triborough. And Ix told LaGuardia it embodied in those official regulations what he had previously said privately, that no more money would be given to Triborough until Moses was off the Triborough board. Most importantly, it gave LaGuardia a public excuse for ousting Moses. An official PWA rule forbade Moses to serve. Its issuance was the move of a fox. "The president helped me draft this order," Ix diaried. But the fox was growing restless. Previously, the president had been careful, always letting Ix do the talking with LaGuardia, not letting himself become directly involved. Now, he discussed the order personally with LaGuardia, Ix wrote, and Roosevelt made another move. Either he himself or Ix, and probably both, told LaGuardia that if he felt he could not force Moses to resign, then they would be satisfied if the mayor promised Ix in writing not to reappoint Moses when his term expired on June 30, 1935, well before the bridge would be finished. This combination of moves stripped LaGuardia of excuses that he could make to the president, if in fact he still wanted any. It gave him the public rationale he would need to justify ousting Moses, and it gave him a private rationale to make to Moses. When he received a copy of the order, it had not been released publicly, of course. He showed it to Moses, apparently to prove to him that he had no choice but to give in. Then the mayor headed for Washington, where he met Ix, and on Thursday, January 3, 1935, he secretly swore to the PWA administrator that he would put the promise in writing as soon as he got back to New York. This is this is a lot of pages dedicated to this little kerfuffle. But nevertheless, I persist. But the mayor had miscalculated, as had Roosevelt and Ix. They may have believed that Moses' loss of popularity had stripped him of his armor, and that Order Number 129 had left him weaponless. But they were wrong, for Moses still possessed a weapon more valuable even than his popularity: his mind. He conceived a masterstroke that simultaneously won him back his popularity and turned the tables on his great enemy. While LaGuardia was in Washington, he did the one thing that no one involved in the closed curtain drama had expected. He leaked the order to the press and thereby pulled the curtain up. There, suddenly spotlighted before the public, stood the President of the United States of America, caught in a most unbecoming posture. Okay, now it's getting juicy. Now I'm like, okay, I think maybe that was worth it. I don't know if we needed 5 pages about it, but it's still fun. Everyone can see that Roosevelt is being petty and holding on to his grudge against Moses. All because Moses, it started way back when they were both park guys, like 10 years ago, and there was like a state parks council, and Moses didn't give any money to Roosevelt for his little upstate projects. And the president was only one figure in a tableau that might have been lifted intact out of that traditional melodrama, The Old Homestead. In that melodrama, a villain used the power of money, the mortgage he held on the old homestead, to force the proud beauty to yield to his dishonorable advances. In the drama that Moses suddenly revealed to the public, there was also a villain, the president, using the power of money, federal relief funds, to force the mayor to perform a dishonorable act, ousting from his job a faithful public servant. And this drama had a hero too, for now that LaGuardia had agreed to side with the president, the faithful public servant was seen by the audience as a man standing alone, without a single ally, and fearlessly fighting for his rights against the two most powerful men in the country. Since, moreover, the critics and the audience didn't know, and never were to learn, the long background of the Roosevelt-Moses feud, their imagination supplied the traditional motive. Press and public assumed that the president was attempting to force Moses out of his job simply because he was a Republican and had criticized the New Deal in his election campaign. And just in case anyone missed the point of the drama, Moses supplied a narration, written with the brilliance that characterized his efforts when he had a legitimate point to make. There are certain facts which should be known to the public, he said. The sole purpose of Order Number 129 was to force him out of his job. Ickes had admitted as much to LaGuardia. And Ickes had also admitted that I was honest and competent, and that the sole reason for the order was that I was not sufficiently friendly to the administration, unquote. He had refused to leave quietly, Moses said. When the mayor explained this situation to me, I told him that I should be glad to retire from his administration entirely if I wanted to, but that I would not take a backdoor out of the Triborough Authority merely because there was pressure to get me out for personal or political reasons. He had refused, he said, because he wanted the American people to know what was happening, because there was a principle involved that was more important than himself. The federal appropriations for public works and work relief are the funds of all the people in the country. If personal or political considerations are to govern the expenditure of public works and relief funds by the federal government, this fact should be known to the public. Reaction proved as violent as Moses had gambled it would be. Unluckily for Ickes, the PWA administrator held a press conference every Thursday. And not knowing that Moses had leaked the story, he held one as usual this Thursday shortly after LaGuardia had left his office. To the administrator's shock, reporters began questioning him about the Order Number 129, which he believed was a secret. As he later wrote in his diary, I was asked whether Farley had ever spoken to me about Moses. To that question, I could honestly say no. Then I was asked whether the president had ever done so. There I had to lie, but again I said no. The lie was to force the press to link Roosevelt with the order only in hints for a day or two, although the hints were broad indeed, but it did nothing to cool its ardor for the story. LaGuardia had boarded his train back to New York, confidently believing that the affair was still secret. Sealed off from the world in a private compartment, he made the trip with that confidence unimpaired. But when he swung off his train at Penn Station at 9:30 p.m., he saw a pack of reporters running toward him along the platform. Luckily for the mayor, an aide, Lester B. Stone, had been telephoned by a reporter for a statement, and thus learned that the story had broken and had hurried to the station. Stone reached the mayor a few steps ahead of the reporters, pulled him aside, and told him what had happened, giving him a moment to think. No one ever accused Fiorello LaGuardia of needing more than a moment. When the reporters engulfed him, he did not admit that he had agreed to dismiss Moses. Instead, when he was asked, "What are you going to do?" he replied, "I'll think it over." And he decided that night to postpone writing Ix the letter he had promised. That proved to be a wise move. For the next day, as one of his advisors was to put it, the shit hit the fan. The public, that most fickle of lovers, embraced Robert Moses in January as fervently as it had pushed him away in November. I think I'm going to stop there. That was one of the least interesting chapters, or least interesting, days for me, I guess. A lot of just, minor characters squabbling. But I think it's going to get fun because the paragraph that I left off on, or, what's coming up, is there's going to be a bunch of press from people that are excited about Robert Moses. And I feel like press stuff is often fun. Nice. Okay, cool. Goodbye.